Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.
Advanced 360 Education is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's Advanced 360 Education. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you again. And we're about to pass 170,000 downloads of this podcast. Thank you to everybody who listens. Of course, we are self-plugging here, writing a book called Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, where we're taking over 100 of our presidential interviews. We're distilling those down to common themes and topics of what's affecting higher education today from the presidential eyes. And we're going to deliver you a book. And hopefully you will buy it, but if you don't, that's okay. Listen to the podcast. That's the cheaper way to do it. If you do, you have to listen to me about 470 times, and who the hell wants to do that? Nobody. So anyway, now that the self-plugging is out of the way, I will tell you guys here on the campus of Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, is a very hot and muggy outside, and our air conditioning is not working. So as I bring my guests in today and my co-host, it might be 97 degrees in my office. So I am literally sweating. One person who has never sweat in his entire life, or at least he hasn't during his retirement, is my guest co-host today. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the guru of online learning. He's Dr. Bill Pepicello. Bill, what's happening?
Hey, hello there, Joe. How are you doing? Everything is fine here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I mean, what you're going through as far as heat is that's the low temperatures here.
Yeah, I'm gonna no on these temperatures. Bill, I want to thank you sincerely. With how busy you are in retirement, that you would take out time to podcast with me, because I know your days are filled with just detailed activity.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm in between trips to Europe and South America and all kinds of places, but I managed to fit you in.
Also in between glasses of wine.
Cheers.
Well, there he is, ladies and gentlemen, my co-host, Bill Pepicello. You've heard him before. In fact, Bill has his own podcast called EdUp Insights, where he's recording season 3 of the podcast these days, right, Bill?
That's right. Season 3 will kick off shortly, and we're going to take some new directions. So if you've been listening, you don't want to miss it.
All right. Well, there you go. I want to bring in my guest now. He's got a big job to do, ladies and gentlemen, and he does it very well. Here he is. His name is Dr. Jonathan Holloway, and he's president at Rutgers University. Jonathan, what's happening?
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the round of applause. I'm assuming it was a standing one, so that's good.
I mean, if I don't quiet the crowd, they're going to keep going, Jonathan. They're going to keep going. How are you, my friend? I'm
doing okay. You know, August, or we're almost in August, is the last bit of the quiet moments of the school year, of the calendar year. But it's also, I'm torn because I'm now seeing some of the athletes return to campus and some of the, getting ready for students to come back. So that's, much as I want summer to last much longer, it's still nice to see some energy coming back. So it's good.
Yeah, I bet. So that's a good place to start, because, schools that have a lot of on-ground students and traditional students are getting ready to welcome students back to campus. I think, of course, memory, at least in Bill's case, doesn't recall itself quickly, but my memory is really sharp. Students are coming back kind of the first time with uninterrupted COVID protocols for the most part. They've right?
Nah, well, I mean, across the nation, I'd say yes. At Rutgers, we brought them back last year. This is my 3rd year as president. First year was remote. Last year, we brought them back, but not fully. I mean, more like I'd say 85% of the way back. Some students had a significant amount of remote classes just because of the luck of the draw. But yes, we are much closer to 100%.
What's the energy like? What's the energy like on campus for your staff, your faculty, the students who are just inching back in right now?
Well, I mean, right now it's still quiet. It's just beginning to tick up. Since I live on campus, I can see these sort of smaller changes. My central cabinet, we're all taking our last bits of vacation before there's, before it's 110%. But I do know that if this is anything like last year, the level of excitement is going to be through the roof because, after being locked down for a whole year, people are just excited to be on campus. And then this year, we're that much more populated. In fact, in New Brunswick, on our main campus, we have the largest incoming class in our history. So,
yeah.
That's right. So this is going to be, it's going to be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Congratulations, largest incoming class in the history of the university.
That's
How
right.
do you pull that off when all the rhetoric around higher ed is declining enrollment? What do you think Rutgers is doing differently or better or more effectively?
Look, I think people recognize that as much as people like to decry the cost of tuition, the high cost of tuition, state universities are still an incredible deal. Especially four-year research universities like Rutgers, one of the better ones in the country. I like to think that, we have a really great product. We have faculty from the leading grad schools in the country end up start their teaching career here, amazing strengths. But I also think that, I know that when people talk about higher ed in the US, they use it as a shorthand for all of higher ed. And there are so many different types of ways that higher ed is expressed. So I know that in community colleges, the enrollment decline is for real. It's actually, and it's hurting other parts of Rutgers, not New Brunswick. And that's a scary proposition. And then you see the explosion of schools like, Western, I'm forgetting right now, Governors or
Western
Southern
Governors University.
Yeah, exactly. That are online universities. So, we're kind of all over the place. I think the challenge for higher ed is that for all of our brains, we're not really good at telling our story with the kind of complexity that's ingrained in it. And then so we're like sitting ducks for these pot shots.
Wow.
Nailed it.
Bill, over to you.
Well, one of the things that is interesting is you were named president and then COVID hit.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
So how was that? How was that transition from year one to year two, and how has it helped you as you come into year three?
So here's, it's kind of amazing. I was announced as president. I came to New Brunswick to be introduced on January, I think it was January 20th of 2020. That same week, looking back in the newspapers, the nation started to report that COVID had finally made it to the US in Seattle.
Yikes!
Now, we now know it had been here for months, but that was just the beginning of the sense. So when I got here, it's like, well, COVID's something that's somewhere else. And then we all know within 6 weeks, that was completely proven wrong. And New York, New Jersey area got devastated by COVID, really terribly. So I accepted a job at a university that looked very different than the one that I moved into 5 months later. In fact, I didn't come back to New Jersey until I moved onto campus. So I started the presidency of a 100,000 person community with 1,000 buildings in it, having been on the campus for a total of 4 hours, having been in 3 buildings. So I was a little conceptually overwhelmed about what I was walking into. And then in my first press conference, like a week later, announced that we'd be going remote for a year. So that won me most popular president in the country prizes, starting out. And then adding to it is that my wife and son stayed in Chicago. We were at Northwestern for the year so he could finish high school. So I was flying back and forth every 2 weeks, which meant I was in travel quarantine all of my first year.
So basically the entire nightmare of what could be happening was it,
Yeah.
right? You're in quarantine away from your family and starting a new job. Yikes.
Exactly. I could have stayed in Evanston, Illinois and run Rutgers and it wouldn't have made a difference because of the way everything was operating. In any event, so that gives you a sense of what I walked into. And by the end of that academic year, my first year, I just was pushed to the limit. It was hard for everybody, but being a new person in a new place with the family away, it was that much harder. So this time last year, when we get into August in a couple of weeks, every single day I saw more people on campus than I'd ever seen before in Rutgers, because just the weird way I came in, because it had been a ghost town my entire first year. And then when I saw people during move-in, which runs like 4 days at Rutgers because we're so big, I couldn't take the smile off my face. And sure, not everything works smoothly. There are a lot of, we're in a very heated moment in our national political, cultural landscape. But when I reflected on, even in those tough moments in my second year, I would reflect on what it was like in my first year. I'm like, I'm good. Like, I can do this, because I'd rather deal with the noise in person than like the being in isolation, frankly. So now this is my third year. And my experience has always been year 3 is when things start to make sense. Like, okay, now I get it. And for me, I'm just kind of curious, because while this is the start of my third year, it's also sort of the start of my second year, because the first year is so weird. So I don't know what to expect, except that I'm excited for it.
Well, you said that you're starting to get it, but let's turn that around. Is your community starting to get you now, and what your agenda is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think they are. When I was introduced myself in January 2020, I had like 7 minutes to tell my story, and I talked about a number of different things. But one thing I said that I thought was a one-off, that I'd say this one time and that would be it, is I evoked the language of a beloved community. That even in a place as big and as amorphous as Rutgers, we should aspire to a beloved community for a whole set of reasons, basically. And when I came back from my day 1 announcement, when they wanted me to write something, 3 or 4 minutes of something, and they said, make sure to mention the beloved community. I'm like, what? No, that was just the January thing. They go, no, that thing has stuck. People have been talking about it in your absence. And the applause was off the chart, but they really did want to hear about that. And I think, to me, that speaks to a need that we have. I think just in our moment across the political spectrum, is that people want to be recognized, they want to be seen, they want to be acknowledged. And those are all elements of what I call the beloved community. And they want to have a sense of belonging, especially post-COVID. I mean, not that we're post-COVID, but post the scariest parts of it. People want it, they want that social connection again. And so that's something that's carried forward, from the very beginning. And people have really embraced it in the way that it was intended, which is a lovely thing, and evoking it and wanting to do more for the community, wanting the community to do more for them. And then some people, because of the way the world operates, have weaponized it and will say, President Holloway, if you really cared about a beloved community, you wouldn't do X, Y, or Z. And as I remind them every time, I'm like, I never said a beloved community would mean that we would agree with one another. In fact, a beloved community is one where it is strong enough to withstand disagreements. That's a beloved community, but they aren't interested in hearing that piece from me. So,
right.
So we go ahead.
Yeah, Jonathan, needless to say, if anybody looks at your CV or your background, you've done just a little bit of work in the DEI, belonging, advocacy for Black student space. I mean, just a little bit. And there's an article that came out recently. I don't remember who put it out, but it talked about why presidents are afraid to speak up and or not speaking up as much as they would like to, because the community is just like a rattlesnake sometimes. No matter what you say, no matter which direction you go,
that's right,
you are having some significant blowback, even when your intentions are there, even when what you say, it's very easy to look at every single word and go, why the heck did he say that? And that's, so anyway, the point of the article was presidents are maybe not speaking us up as much as they would like to. And instead of doing the work of focusing on the students, there's this piece where they have to take time away for their brain power to make sure that their posture is right, or that they're saying the right things. And that world of being so conscious of every word you put out takes time away from serving the students. That's my position anyway, is that you can't do both. And like you guys, presidents serve students very passionately, and everything you do is about serving students, faculty, staff, and so on. But when you have to worry about every word you say, it takes that focus away. How do you feel about that? And why don't more presidents maybe speak up and say what's on their mind?
Well, there's one, I think you diagnosed it correctly, and it's certainly
See that, Bill? I can get it right every once in a while, buddy.
every once in a while.
Not often, though.
But an all-star player succeeds, 3 to 4 times out of 10. That's
That's right.
But but it is very difficult these days because we live in a socially mediated world, and smartphones can do amazing things for us in a productive, constructive way. And we've also know they can do incredibly damaging things. And we have not, and this is still a new phenomenon, from an administrative standpoint, we are still learning how to work in that space, because we of my generation simply aren't built that way. We weren't raised digitally native. But so there's that challenge. The fact of the matter, though, is I think, look, presidents are there to serve students, faculty, and staff, but they serve at the will of boards. And so one has to be careful or thoughtful about how much you're going to cultivate, even train, if you will, your board to understand who you are so that you can do the things you want to say. That is really hard in the state public school environment when all our public politics are so radicalized, because you're exactly, I know for a fact that presidents who shall not be named have been at wit's end in terms of navigating, like they wanted to set a policy related to COVID vaccinations. They know this is the right thing to do from a public health standpoint. And their governor, their legislature, or a member of the board said, if you do that, your appropriation's at risk or you'll be fired. So their hands are tied there, right? But then I think there's another phenomenon that is much more subtle, much more personal, is that, look, being a college president is a tremendously difficult job these days, but it's also tremendously exciting and rewarding and flattering. And so, like, when I'm at a public event, I'm always accompanied by somebody, and the sort of the C's part, so I can get through things really quickly. Or when I'm just out in the public, I'm a public figure, so people will come up and say hello. Like, the ego trip you can go on as a president is pretty astonishing. And I think this is exactly where presidents get into trouble, because they think it really is about them as the individual. It's about the office. That's what people get so excited about. So when I talk to people who are interested in becoming presidents in particular, I say, in order to be successful, and actually part of success is being independent, you have to be willing to leave the job. Like, if you love the job so much, if it fills a void in you in some way, you will end up doing everything you can to keep it, which means you are going to be making public statements that are against your personal values. The odds are these days. And I love all the fun stuff that comes with my job. Who wouldn't? It's great. But there's a lot of heavy stuff as well. And I didn't pursue the job for the fun stuff. I pursued the job because I wanted to make a difference. And for me, it means I'm going to have to be honest. And I've said as much from the beginning when I was interviewing. And I've been true to that, and my board has respected that. So I think I'm lucky I have a great board, but I'm willing to walk away from it, if that means to be honest. And anyway, that's the way I think about it. I just think you have to take the risk to be honest, because I really do think there are a lot of people out there, just like the beloved community. I thought it was just a one-time thing, only to find out there was a craving for it, talking about and acting towards it. And what I have found, not by an intention, not intending to get there, I'll finish a talk or I'll finish an answer, and people will come up to me later. We can't believe you're so candid. I'm like, well, it's easier to tell the truth than to try to remember my lies. So, we'll just stick with the truth. And
amazing.
Love it. Bill?
That's, I hope that new presidents and even more tenured presidents will listen to your last remarks, Jonathan, because they are absolutely spot on. And I'm talking, and you're talking as someone who says, well, here's what's going to happen when I leave the office. I'm talking as someone who left the office, and I had a lot of fun stuff. And I have worked with, as you know, somebody on your staff, and we did fundraising for healthcare, and I had partnerships with sports teams, and it was a lot of fun. But when I left, the phone didn't ring very much. And
sometimes that sounds really good, I must say. Actually, the idea of it.
And you know what? That's absolutely correct. Words right out of my mouth. It's okay.
Fabulous.
I mean, it gave me an opportunity to look and see what I wanted to do, or the opportunity to do nothing for a bit, which I did until Joe came along and
It's been a long time of nothing, Bill, I got to tell you.
And Joe said, hey, you got to, get off the couch and come and do this. But those are wise words for folks. But I want to follow up on one of the things that you were talking about in answering Joe's question. And I hate to use the catchwords, but especially given your research background, I'd like to get a little bit of a feel for how you see cancel culture these days, because certainly you would have the opportunity to see that as we see statues being torn down and buildings renamed and students demanding reparations. How do you see that? What do you think the major influences are?
That's a big question, and I've certainly lived through a lot of really challenging moments related to that question. I think, let me start coming to it from a slightly different direction. Since you were talking about names, memorialization, et cetera, let me talk about an entry point into these conversations, which is about freedom of speech. That a lot of students, when I was back at Yale as dean of the college, and there was a lot of student displeasure over a range of issues. And this was in the moment when students across the country were really rising up to express their displeasure relating to issues with regard to issues relating to race. And I was talking to a member of Yale's Board of Trustees, or I was talking to the board, and actually a similar thing happened when I was provost at Northwestern, a different series of events, same kind of topic. I said, and I was asked, like, what's going on? What are they thinking? So, they're being disruptive. I'm like, now, wait a second. Look, I don't like some of the things they're saying about me personally. That's very hurtful and such. But the fact is they haven't disrupted the campus in either of those situations. It's like they are expressing their opinion. And these are free speech acts. Now, it's not speech that we like, but you know what? That's the point of the Free Speech Act. And in fact, they are, some people are looking at these students as acting up and being, fill in the negative adjective, right? Like, now, okay, they may be immature, but like they're 19. Or they may be saying crazy things. I'm like, yeah, but we were all 19 once, and I suspect we said crazy things. And how can you stand? I'm like, no, I don't like it. Since I'm getting, kicked in the privates right now, I don't like it. But the fact is they are doing exactly what they have been taught to do. Okay, so that's sort of a challenge to people who are so quick to dismiss, these students who are, who can't handle these things, who are crybabies, all that kind of stuff. Now, having said that, there is no doubt that these dynamics also go into the space of excess. And that's where sort of the cancel culture coding comes in. And there's no doubt that some of the stuff I find just kind of silly. It's like, yeah, society is really hard and messy, and this is part of it. And you can't cancel it. It's a part of it. And you may not like what this person has to say. That's great. Then use your words to prove them wrong. Don't cancel them. Okay. And that's just a tough lesson in citizenship, frankly. And that that cuts across the political spectrum. That is an apolitical statement as far as I'm concerned, because and I'm oversimplifying for effect, if the political right is the group that is known for defending free speech, let's just say that, they are also really quick to get upset when students on the left are raising their voices. Can't have it both ways. A speech act is hard, and it should be. And cancel culture is part of it. The challenge in this, and here I go back to what I was saying at the beginning of social media, is that all of these things are happening at a pace and a scale the adults have never experienced, and we don't know what to do with it. And I've been open with students. They've talked about a sense of injury. I remember a student talking to me at a town hall about how because of a position the university took, they didn't feel safe on campus. I'm like, now wait a second. Do you literally not feel safe? Because if you don't feel safe, I need to know that, because that's my first responsibility. And when you dig into it, it's the word safe is being used in different ways than it used to be used. It's not about their physical safety. It's about their emotional safety. And I take that seriously, but I also don't understand it at some point. So at some point, I'm like, the world is hard. You need to learn how to navigate these things emotionally, because if you think it's messy here, oh my God, it's far messier outside.
Yeah, wait till you get a job, your first job. Things are going to be pretty messy.
Exactly. And so, there's an interesting fine line about wanting to be empathetic and understanding that the person's sense of not feeling safe is very real to that person. I respect that. But they need to also hear me say, I don't understand it. Like, I don't, what you're saying sounds like it's making you anxious or making you frustrated or angry, but you're not unsafe. So there's some nomenclature issues, there's some technological issues, and then there's some people who don't want to take their own medicine issues. And that's on both sides of the political spectrum.
Advanced 360 Education is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. Advanced 360 Education does not simply rely on instinct to make assumptions about audiences or key data points. Rather, through data intelligence, client strategies take on a higher level of effectiveness. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's 310-704-5369. That's Anthony Espinoza at Advanced 360 Education. Well, speaking of taking our own medicine, and Jonathan, I begged Dr. Bill Pepicello here to not force me into doing this to you, but he just said, we have to do this to Jonathan. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, that Bill asked me to include Jonathan in our newest episode within episode of Higher Ed Word Association. This is where I give you a word related to higher education. You have to give me the first thoughts, words, feelings, and please elaborate of what's going on in your mind when I say these words to you. And of course, because Jonathan, you're our guest, I'll start with Bill. And he'll fumble and bumble through an answer, and then you get to perfect it. But that's how we like to set Bill up for. Let's see how he does on the balancing line here, on the balance beam. All right, Bill, here's a build up to this one. I'm not just going to give you the word. But these two words are thrown around to encompass lots of things these days. And it's almost like we can't define what its meaning is anymore. And that's student success. Everything is student success. This is student success and that's student success. What comes to your mind in hearing the word student success?
Well, I mean, as you know, words are my life. My master's and PhD are in linguistics, Jonathan. And student success, yeah, I can tell you, especially, I've worked on the light at, for instance, Temple University and University of the Pacific, and on the dark side at University of Phoenix for a number of years. And student success depends on who's defining it. Accreditors will define it somewhat differently from a college president than from an admissions person. And I think ultimately, from my perspective, student success is sort of a long-term initiative or goal where a student actually becomes a valuable member of a profession and society in general and their families. So there.
Same thing you, Jonathan. Student success. What does that mean in Rutgers?
Same question. Okay. No, actually, I agree with so much of what you just heard from Bill. I think, let me just launch from where he took off with some concrete examples. Student success can certainly mean, are they graduating in 4 or 5 or thinking of undergrads from 4, 5, or 6 years? Let's just call it 5 for averages. They're graduating in 5 years. That's a marker of success that is measured actually by the federal government, by rankings, so on and so forth. That's success. Then you can also move another step. It's like, well, they're graduating, but is their degree, has their education been in service of their next thing? And that's different from what degree they're in. Like, will they be prepared for the job in accounting or in criminal studies or for a PhD program for medical school? Depends on the student. Like that's a measure of student success if they're prepared. And then you got to think about, going back to what I said before, the complexity of higher ed. If a student is coming in from a non-college going tradition family, they're first gen, if they are coming in from a low socioeconomic standpoint, status, if they are, you can keep on adding different attributes that make succeeding in college hard. For me, student success for some of those students is, did they come back for their sophomore year? Because we lose a lot of people between their freshman and sophomore year.
Fire.
And did they come back for the junior year? Because once they do that, they're going to get through,
yep.
Right? So it's like, where in time are we talking? I think a generation ago, most of us would just said graduation, period. And now we've become, I think, in part because of remote and online education, we realize there's a whole many different types of ways to move through college. And so we've become more democratic in thinking what student success means, which makes the answer long-winded like the one I just gave you. But I think it speaks to the truth of what the terms mean.
All right, so you got a handle on this now, Jonathan, I can tell. I'm going to give you the next one, and Bill, you can opt in or opt out of this one if you'd like. This is going to go to Jonathan first. Balancing education and athletics.
Why don't you give me an easy one? Or a hard one,
I think the last one's a little easier.
Balancing education and athletics. So I'm at a university at Rutgers where there's a lot of hostility still, at least noise. I don't know how many people, about Rutgers being in the Big Ten. Like, we shouldn't be here. It's a drain on resources. Athletics.
If I could just interrupt 1 second and ask Bill, did you know that Rutgers had sports teams? I just want to see if we're on the same page here.
I know that their football team was 2-7 last year. Does that help?
No,
that's also incorrect. But.
Rutgers has incredible sports teams. I was just checking Bill's knowledge.
Yes, I'm the Scarlet Knights, man. Come on.
Okay, you know the mascot. But look, the fact is, Rutgers' athletic performance in the Big Ten has not been great historically. We just had our best athletic year ever. We were in 5 Big Ten championships, won one of them. That just hasn't happened before. Football went to a bowl game because of our academic accomplishments. It was a tiebreaker, and because we were a high-performing academic school. But people are upset that we're in the Big Ten because it's a drain on resources, because it takes up so much money. Any university president will sit in awe in the Division I, athletics makes up 2.5% to 4.5% of the budget, but the amount of time it takes up is astronomical in terms of the public affairs piece of it. But when athletics works well, there is no single thing the university can do that'll bring more people to the table, the arena, the bar, the living room, wherever it is, that will allow the university to tell another story beyond just athletic prowess, but also about their academic success as well. When football teams, this is just a fact, or go to major bowl games, when basketball teams, and men's teams in particular, because there are these gender differences in the way the sports resonate, when basketball teams go far into the Final Four, what happens next? Applications go up for those schools. I mean, I'm not making it up, literal fact. And so there is at base a utility function to athletics. If it's done properly, done ethically, and done well, it really boosts the whole academic enterprise. And while Big Ten, Power Five conference football in particular is very expensive, it also pays for the rest of the sports by and large. So it's very complicated and far more complicated than my answer suggests. But the last thing I'll say on this, I do a February address to the university on university finances. And this past February, I just addressed this question head on. I'm like, there are so many parts of university that will never make money, but they are critical to the university. Libraries will never make money. We can't function without libraries. So many of the humanities and social sciences will never make money, but we must have them. Athletics will never make money at Rutgers in terms of, it won't be in the black. It's structurally designed not to be that way. But to pull out of the Big Ten would be catastrophic reputationally, financially, and also academically, because by being in the Big Ten, we're part of an $11.6 billion annual research enterprise. So there's a lot of stuff going on between athletics and academics. Now, that's at the enterprise level, the university perspective. From the student level, I love working with athletes. And I actually just said this 2 nights ago in a talk I was giving. I love working with athletes because they know how to fail. They fail every single day, and then they get up and try again. And if our non-athletic students had that same level of resilience, it would actually be a healthier, I'm not blaming those students, but we would have a healthier, more resilient environment on campus. Bill,
you want to take that one too? Balancing education?
Absolutely. I have a much different take, not an oppositional take, but I have been at a number of institutions, as Joe knows, on my podcast, EdUp Insights. I call myself an education vagabond. I was at, of course, I was at Brown University, where I got my graduate degrees, and we don't need to say anything more about sports, except for, maybe lacrosse and hockey when you get into the Ivy League. But then I was at Temple in the 70s and early 80s, and they were awful. I was at the University of Delaware when its football team was on the wane. And then things picked up because when I got to University of Phoenix, our sports teams had never, ever been defeated in any major sport. And I touted that quite proudly. And given that we had a professional football stadium named after us, that was quite an accomplishment. And just to follow up on one item that Jonathan brought up, and that has to do with working with athletes. I started at University of Delaware. I was teaching composition, and I took on as my personal challenge teaching introductory composition to all the athletes. And it was the most remarkable experience of my life.
Amazing.
And you just gave me a great new perspective on what I did there, Jonathan. And because some of these folks really didn't have a great skill set as far as grammar and composition and spelling, but they were also the most tenacious. And right. And I understand that quite differently now. So thank you.
Athletes do not like to fail. I mean,
grit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Jonathan, last one. This is it's like hitting a softball with a 2x4. You're going to knock those out of the park. You brought it up at the beginning. I had it down because you've done so much work in the DEI space, and you hear DEIJ. In this case, you said DEIB, B standing for belonging. So what does belonging actually mean at Rutgers University?
So that's a great question. I thank you for it. When I think of the beloved community or belonging, which is a key component of the beloved community, it's a recognition that, look, when we think of a university, think of probably students first, maybe faculty, one or the other. We don't think of staff. I mean, if you're thinking in the abstract about a university, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. But the fact is, we know, if we think about it, that if staff, often that who we don't see, If they don't do their job, within a day or two, the whole university shuts down. If the garbage isn't picked up, if the food isn't delivered, if the HVAC isn't functioning, so on and so forth, we can't do our work. Students can't do their work. And so there's a whole bunch of people, thousands of them at Rutgers, who usually are wearing uniforms, utilities, maintenance, grounds, janitorial, custodial, dining services, who are critical to the functioning of the enterprise. And yet they are not named or acknowledged. So when I talk to the beloved community, it's not just, hey, progressive student and conservative student, recognize you share something in common, this thing called Rutgers, and then have your disagreement. But if you disagree, if you acknowledge you share something in common, Rutgers, the nature of your disagreement will be different. It will not be winner take all. It'll be like, well, I kind of see where your point is. I get it. You know, we both like going to the same wings place. You can't be that bad, you know, so we're going to do our thing. But belonging is not just a thing that students need. It's not just a thing that faculty need. It's a thing that staff need as well. So when I think about Rutgers, is really the acknowledgement that everybody has a role to play, every single person. And I have maybe an outsized public role, but if Doris doesn't clean up in my office, I can't do my job. So Doris is absolutely critical to the work that I do. And same thing with my personal assistant who manages my calendar. I mean, I don't know where I'm going in any given day, but my calendar tells me and she arranges it. So belonging is about recognizing all the complexity and layers of a community and saying that, acknowledging that everybody has value. Imagine if we actually dared to think like that in our society today, that everybody has value. I mean, so much of the noise we experience would actually quiet down. But we aren't structured that way. And which to me is heartbreaking.
Bill, belonging. Sorry you have to follow that, man.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
I don't think I could say it better than that. I mean, the essence of being at the top of the food chain, as it were, is to understand that there's a whole set of layers below you that support you in that role. And I think you just just explained that perfectly, Jonathan. And again, I couldn't agree more. My assistant was certainly, my assistant knew me better than my wife when I was the president, and knew what I was doing and what I was up to, and certainly knowing that everyone has a role in student success. You know, see how
there we go. Yes.
See what I did there, Joe? You have to learn from me.
Well done.
That, and I think that's true. I mean, I sort of just flipped that out, but it really is true. Is that the success of the institution really depends on everyone.
With that, we're going to need to go to the judges and find out who won this episode of Higher Ed Word Association. Judges, did Dr. Jonathan Holloway win this episode?
100%.
Yet again, your losing streak continues, Bill. You can never win here at the EdUp Experience. The guest always wins, so you will continue to lose. But thank you for being an active participant, ladies and gentlemen. And that's another Higher Ed Word Association episode. All right, Bill, over to you for the last question, and then I'll close out the episode.
Well, because you've been so rude to me today, I'm going to close out the episode.
Jonathan, I would love you too. I would love you too.
We close every episode by asking two questions of our guests. And so I'll ask you the big two.
This is a hostile takeover, ladies and gentlemen. Hostile takeover of the podcast happening right now. Go ahead, Bill.
It is. It's an insurrection. First is, what have we not asked you? Because Joe gets so interested in himself, he sometimes doesn't give you a chance to say things that you might want to tell us about Rutgers and some of the things you're doing there. And then second of all, how do you see the future of higher education?
Well, those are great. And my answer is going to merge those two questions. I can't think of a better way to close out this show. I can't think of a more talented set of questions to come my direction. So I'm thrilled.
What is happening on this episode?
It's an insurrection.
Oh my gosh.
But seriously, so I had my inauguration delayed a year because of COVID this past November. And in that inaugural speech, I announced the formation of the launch of the Rutgers Summer Service Initiative, RSSI. And what this was, the applications would open up in January, and we'd select people in the spring for summer internships, which are wrapping up right now. RSSI was doing multiple things at once. It was saying the intention of it is that we have a very diverse, socioeconomically diverse set of students that come to Rutgers. A third of our students are Pell eligible, so low income. And when it comes to summertime, what are they doing? They got to work. They got to work full time to try to make ends meet for the rest of the year, right? They cannot, and because of that, they are not able to take advantage of summer internship opportunities unless it pays, and internships don't pay anymore, right? So because I feel, and this connects to the future of higher ed, because I feel that we are in a crisis in this nation, a crisis of preserving democracy, I feel that very strongly. I think higher ed has a very special role to play in that, because if we educate our citizens, this is the best way to protect democracy, I believe. Well, what if we got our students involved in the front lines of service in the nonprofit world, in the public service world? And that's what RSSI internships are all about. They have to be nonprofit, service-oriented, public service, elected officials internships. And these internships don't pay, but Rutgers pays the student. So we are helping students who cannot afford to not work in the summer for paying jobs. Like, we will pay you to take this unpaid nonprofit internship and learn about that sector. Got to take a class as well. Everybody will take it together. And we're going to pay your hosting organization $1,000 just to help remediate the expenses. And the goal was to get 100 students sent out in this trial year. I had resources for 2 years in my discretionary funds. When I announced this, two things happened. We had donors. We did not solicit yet. We had, within, I think, the first couple weeks of the announcement, 2 different couples who paid essentially for the first years of the program.
Epic.
We didn't even ask them for the money, and it came in. And then when it came to the time of the application portal opening, we were trying to get 100 students. We had we had 600 students apply for these positions.
Yeah.
So, like the beloved community, this spoke to me of a need, a hunger to actually be of service. And so I really, with that, I mean, I felt that already in my inauguration, but when I saw that, I'm like, okay, it's not just me. People are hungry to actually be of good use, to be of service for the common good. And so the RSSI is part of that equation. And now it's only 100, but we're going to grow that baby. You know, we have not stopped. We're going to expand its footprint. And to me, that's just, I couldn't be more excited about a program than that, because it speaks to the desire from this young generation who are all these cancel culture kids who can't get their head out, head on straight. What are they doing? They're signing up to try to actually make the world better. That makes me feel good.
Wow. Well, how do you like that? That's pretty incredible. Bill, any last thoughts on that?
No, I did not know about that program.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It is spectacular.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, before I close out this episode, I guess I'd first like to thank the host of this episode, Dr. Bill Pepicello.
Anytime, Joe.
Somehow the hosting was ripped from my fingers and ended up in his. He, of course, is a guru of online learning. And my guest today, full of great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, Jonathan. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.
He is Dr. Jonathan Holloway, and he's president of Rutgers University. Jonathan, I have to ask you, did you have a good EdUp experience today?
It was fabulous. I recommend it to all my friends.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you. There he is, the guest, and there he is, the host. I guess I'm your co-host, Dr. Joe Saluzzo. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Effective marketing for educational institutions requires a dedicated partner that understands the complex constantly evolving digital landscape in which colleges, universities, and career schools compete. The EdUp Experience podcast partner, Advanced 360 Education, is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. Advanced 360 Education does not simply rely on instinct to make assumptions about audiences or key data points. Through data intelligence, client strategies take on a higher level of effectiveness, whether the goal is driving enrollment, alumni engagement, or other educational marketing campaigns. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's Anthony Espinoza, 310-704-5369, a360education.com.